Hi, I'm Greg. I'm one of the founders of Commit. We're a remote first community for software developers. And I'm really excited to connect with Sean about technical interviews and his experiences there. I think one of the things that makes Sean really unique and a valuable part of the technical community is that he's willing to open source his knowledge. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So maybe a little bit background on me is that I'm from Victoria, British Columbia. I've been in Techstars my whole life. The first company I did, we sold eBay market data. We partnered with them back in 2008, back when eBay was way bigger than Amazon, and sold their data for them and actually got acquired by eBay. But then my next opportunity was with a company called Hootsuite, where I built out their business strategy there and their go-to-market plan there. And today I founded Commit. And Commit was founded on the principle that employment is changing drastically with remote, and that we could build a large, impactful company that just focused on the talent. And one of the first things we tackled was making career transitions not even less painful, but actually pretty delightful. And so one of the things that is really challenging about finding a new job as a technical professional is the technical interview. And that's something that I'm really excited about our guest today, Sean, to dig into. Sean's a site reliable SRE at Twitter and built one of the largest leak code study guides and open sourced it on GitHub, which makes it really, really unique and valuable. Really holds true to our values at Commit, where we try to share our information as publicly as possible. But Sean, I would love for you to share a little bit more about yourself and your background with the audience today.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, everyone, I'm Sean. As Greg mentioned, I'm an SRE at Twitter. I joined back in July and I'm loving every single second of it. Before that, I was an engineer at a startup here in Toronto called TunnelBear. They were a VPN platform. And before that, I had a handful of internships at small and large companies like Capital One, PagerDuty. I was at Wattpad, I was at Bank of Montreal. So I've worked in small and large companies, and excited to talk today about my experience in technical interviews, things that I've learned, things that I've heard from other people, and hopefully things that will benefit everyone in the audience. Definitely open to questions. Throw them in the chat at any time, and we can discuss them.
So the most important rule of doing a presentation is tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. And this is the tell them what you're going to tell them part of our slide. So we're going to ask Sean about really specifically, what are the most important algorithms to know when you're going through a traditional technical interview process? Two, how do you showcase the soft skills? Being really talented is one thing, it's half of the equation, but then the other thing is being really collaborative. That's what companies are looking for, talented and collaborative engineers that can work well with others and have those essential skills to succeed in a team environment, because this is not an individual sport, it's a team one. And then also, how do you tell your story? How do you maximize the impact of your experiences and tell a really concise story? I think that a lot of us engineers are pretty wary when it comes to marketers and salespeople, but there is just like there's a concise way to write documentation about a feature, there's a concise way to highlight the parts of your background that make really, really good sense to the person that you're talking to, and adjusting that for the audience is really, really important. So yeah, let's jump into it. What are the algorithms? Hey, I got a job interview coming up. What are the 3 ones that I need to know the resources on? What's the cheat sheet here, Sean?
I was thinking a bit about this, and the ones that come straight to mind are BFS and DFS, so breadth first search and depth first search. And those to me are like Swiss Army knives, because they're for searching for specific values or targets, whatever it might be. And you can apply them on like 2D matrices. You can apply them on trees, whether it's like binary trees, binary search trees, n-ary trees. You can apply them on graphs if they're directed or undirected. And I've also seen some questions where you can actually apply BFS on strings. So things like finding the minimum number of changes to a word, like changing the word Sean to seen, from SEAN to SEEN. BFS is a candidate for a possible solution. So I think those are the ones that I think you'd get the most value out of if you had a really, really short time span to study. Following up, I probably think binary search is a really like classic algorithm. You should know it, should be able to write from scratch. I've had friends at Google who've interviewed with them and they've asked modified versions of it. We're not searching for an exact value, you're searching for some number in a range. And last but not least, probably think I probably think algorithms like sliding windows and like backtracking. I think those two are also ones that are key to know. Especially sliding windows teaches you the difference between like a substring versus subsequence. Substring is like a contiguous section of a string, where a subsequence could be any the combination in any order, and subsequences usually are dynamic programming, which is a lot trickier, a lot harder. But I think those are my top three if I had to cram for an interview. And not that you should cram, but if you had something coming up on the fly, definitely.
Cool. So we talked just about the most popular ones if you had to cram,
Mhm.
but maybe taking a step back out to somebody that's preparing for technical interviews, what do most people get wrong when it comes to preparing for like algorithms and doing their algorithm studying for technical interviews?
Ah, that is a good thing. I speak from experience because I initially, before I interviewed with Twitter, I went through a handful of other companies, both companies I'd love to work at and companies who were doing interesting things. And I just did not do enough mock interviews to at the beginning. I did not practice enough with friends. I did not practice enough with strangers. And I was pretty good at certain types of questions, but questions that I did not, I struggle with, and questions that were completely new to me. How did I go about strategically solving them? Like reiterating the question, breaking it down, going through examples, coming with brute force, stating time and space complexity. I definitely crumbled at the beginning of my prep, um, just because I didn't have enough practice. I had all this knowledge, but I did not actually apply it.
And I want to just click on that a little bit. You had the knowledge, but you didn't know how to apply it. Like how much of that was just the social anxiety of being in this state where people are like quizzing you and you have to try to be the smartest person in the room?
Definitely. Stress and being able to handle stress during an interview is a skill that you're not taught in school. You're not taught at work. It comes with just practice. And like I tell my friends who've been prepping, I'd rather fail during a mock interview than during an actual interview. And just being able to get feedback, because not a lot of companies give feedback. And that is, I think, the most important thing that helps you grow as an individual. Realizing like, hey, I wasn't too knowledgeable on this topic that I was asked, or I did not know how to go about deriving time and space complexity of the solution, or the interview hinted, but I wasn't able to pick up on that hint. And that shows, are you able to work in a collaborative environment? And it begs a few other questions, but definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I got some more questions on this, but in general, that social anxiety is real. We see it in even non-technical interviews that a lot of people aren't comfortable meeting with new people, telling their story. But I think that it's something. Do you think it's something that's learned, that people can learn just through repetition?
Yes, definitely. If you are an introvert and you just know you like doing your own thing, these mock interviews, you get like I think I did close to 2 dozen before Twitter, and as I was going through other companies, and it helped me work with individuals who were really helpful in interviews, giving lots of hints, helping lead me along the way, and also exposed me to mock interviewers who just didn't really care. They were just there to get practice from there. And you'll have interviewers who are like that. I've had interviewers who were just disengaged, and it didn't give a good signal to me. Just if we were to work together, right? Because you are interviewing with your future team,
Yeah.
and if you're with someone who sort of doesn't really show enthusiasm, what does that mean for the rest of the team? It sort of raises that red flag.
Yeah, I've been in investor meetings like that where the
Mm.
people are disengaged, so I can understand that. In general, now that you're on the other side of this at a big, impactful company like Twitter, um, how often do companies change these questions? Like, is it something that it's been pretty consistent, or is it something that they actively change? Like, how do they make decisions on what questions to even ask?
Yeah, I think it goes on a company by company basis. I know at Twitter, teams have their own freedom to come up with the questions, whether it's for the phone screen or on sites. So it varies depending on team. Now, if questions are leaked, then definitely you could probably see them being removed from like a question bank or something. I know Twitter and Google, they have question banks, like hundreds of questions. So you can't really prep for any question that's been previously asked, because you never know, maybe you'll get something asked differently. But I know that questions are shared amongst friends. There's NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, exist for a reason. But I think questions for whiteboarding, that they stay within the same like 8 or 9 patterns out there. It's just like new questions. If if you're not counting, how many golf balls can fit into an airplane, it's how many golf balls can fit into like a like a new SUV or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it's just switching the question.
What Now, you've been on the other side of this, giving these questions, right? And so you've helped
Mhm.
people prep, you've been on the other side. You personally, when you're putting someone through this process, what are you looking for? What are the flags that you like? What are your green flags and what are your red flags when it comes to
Yeah.
the algorithm questions?
I think with respect to algorithms, red flags immediately are people jumping into solutions and coding before I've given them the green light. Like I'm on their side. Sounds like a good idea, because at the end of the day, if you start coding a solution at a company you're working at and it turns out to be wrong, that's a lot of hours of your own time wasted, plus other reviewers, plus it could introduce bugs. So that's number one thing I look out for. Number two is individuals aware of trade-offs. If there's a solution that you can use like a map for introducing linear space, whereas if there's another solution where you don't need it but it's a higher time complexity, is an individual aware of that? Definitely here at Twitter, I have to be aware of all trade-offs that we make, whether it's scaling up a service or introducing like a new load balancer or something. There's always going to be a positive and negative, and at the end of the day, is there like a net positive? Is there a gain for what we're trying to solve? So I think those are the two red ones. The green ones, the green flags that I definitely look for are, is the individual able to produce readable code and the correct solution? If they're telling me like, okay, I'm gonna be implementing like a nested for loop for this solution, are they struggling with just doing a nested for loop? So essentially, are they able to translate idea to code? And I think that comes with a lot of practice, because you don't want to be worrying about syntax during an interview. That's something that I stress. Like if you're going to choose Python or Java, like how I do, know the built-in methods, know how to do a hash map from scratch, know how to do like a queue from scratch. And I think being able to explain when you're stuck, why you're stuck, so having some form of self-awareness and what you think the next step should be definitely helps me as an interviewer in giving you the right hints without giving you too much information. Because at the end of the day, I want to see you succeed. I'm there to bring on like a new team member, and if you can work with me, I think that just shows that there's a good fit.
Cool. And by the way, I don't see any chat thing anymore. So Paris, if you see any chats or questions that come up, you can raise your hand. Or can you see them, Sean?
Yes, they pop up into like a separate window at the very bottom. I don't think anyone has asked any
Okay, that's
as
cool.
yet, but yeah.
Paris, you can, and sorry, I think my setup for some reason doesn't have that right now. I'm not going to mess around with it too much, but this is kind of a bridge between the algo question and the soft skill question. This is my transition. If someone is really stumped, like let's say there's a question that they just kind of freeze and they just feel really, really stumped. Like it's that kind of like nightmare scenario, right? Like, oh, what if they ask me a question where I kind of freeze? What's the best response that person could have? Have you seen somebody really respond well in a situation like that? They can, again, like, let's just say they are talented, but they just happen to be stumped on that one question.
Yeah, this is where, if they've exhausted all their resources and they are reaching out for help, this is where I'll definitely jump in and hold their hand and be like, okay, we've talked about X, Y, and Z so far. You've mentioned, X is a possible solution, but it's not the best. You mentioned Y is possible, but it doesn't make sense. And then I would be like, okay, what other data structures, algorithms are out there for this specific, scenario? So if we're dealing with trees, you can do BFS, DFS, like I mentioned earlier. And if they've ruled out one, I'll be like, okay, how about the other one? Does that make sense in this scenario? And if it does, if they've caught on with a spark, I'll be like, okay, let's go through a smaller example of this question. Maybe we're not dealing with like a massive tree of like 40, 50 nodes. Let's go with the one with like 3 or 4 nodes that just, that is just like a Mickey Mouse example. Like it's just bare minimum we need for figuring this out. And if they're onto that, that's where I'll be more supportive, and I'll be able to be like, hey, okay, we're making good progress. Lead me along. We've talked about this idea. How might things change now?
Right. And so it sounds like in those cases where they were stumped, they were at least transparent, honest with the interviewer, so
Yes.
that they're giving them a signal like, hey, that's something maybe I'm not as comfortable with. I don't have a high degree of certainty about this. And as long as you're verbalizing and communicating and being collaborative, giving the interviewer a chance to guide you, that's part of being successful at these as well.
Yes, 100%. If you're silent in the interview, it's very, very hard for me to read minds. And I don't know if any interviewer can, but if you're like, hey, like, I'm not sure, this is what I've tried, I think it could be this or this, it definitely helps me say, like, okay, this could be a possible candidate, or if you usually follow up with a question like, tell me more about this solution, it most likely isn't the right one, because they're trying to interviewers, in my experience, are trying to get you to have some level of like self-realization, like this is not the right thing, no, this is not the right tool for this job.
Very cool. And so
Yeah.
let's kind of transition, and that's really great answers. I think people got a lot of value out of that. So I think that there's the technical aspect that we've been talking about, but what about we call them soft skills? We like to call them essential skills that hiring managers want people to showcase throughout the technical interview. So yeah, what's your perspective on the soft skill side of things? How much should folks prepare this part for the interview process, and what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, definitely. Soft skills are just as important. I'm reaching into my bin over here to grab my notes. So for my behavioral interviews, even at Twitter and other companies, I have here about 4 pages of notes back in front of my career, and these are things talking about like my role, high points, low points, accomplishments, and I just really, really casually wrote this out. Just for me to be like, okay, I've worked at this company, here's what I worked on, here's what I can talk about. If they're like, tell them about a time where you took ownership, or tell them about a time where you failed, or tell them about, one of those generic questions. This is my secret for prepping for behavioral interviews. Just taking the time to jot note things that you've worked on, and accomplishments. Because at the end of the day, I need to take those 4 pages and wrap them into a story for some questions that were asked, right? So I think behavioral interviews, they are weighed the exact same as technical interviews with a different rubric. But we have one question in the Q&A section. But I think they showcase 1, your brand, what you worked on, what you've accomplished, and 2, is this individual aware of things they've worked on, or did they just have their head down and just do the work that they were assigned? And 3, what is it like to work with this individual? Can they communicate clearly? Are they able to explain technical concepts clearly? Are they able to show like levels of growth, show levels of self-awareness? And I think all of those things wrapped into questions are things you should expect.
Yeah, and you know what? The question has to do more technical interviews. We'll save it for the end when we do kind of a roundup, so we'll get there, Omar. But I think that there's some key. Oh, sorry, there's I got a chat over there. I think there's some key things there. First of all, Sean, you're a big fan of writing in general for notes, like handwritten notes. But a lot of folks might be like, "Oh, that sounds like a lot of work to go and like look back at my career and write these highlights and things like this." Is there outside of technical interviews, what's a good reason to do this in general, in terms of analyzing your past career? Like for you, Outside of preparing for a technical interview, what were some of the benefits you got of just going through that process, looking back at your career, thinking about your narrative, thinking about your story?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good question, and I think it steps into the realm of your career path. Where do you see yourself? My North Star, like where I want to see myself in 5, 10 years, is in engineering management. So, like as an engineering manager, director, whatever it might be. And so, as I was writing this out, I'm like, okay, I've worked on projects, I've led projects, and so there's been some level of growth there. So as I'm here at Twitter, I'm thinking now, what are the next steps for me? Do I want to stay in management? Does becoming like a staff engineer or principal engineer later on, is that interest me? Just becoming team lead? Does maybe switching career tracks? So I'm always, this helped me reflect on where I've been, and now I have more awareness on where I'm heading. And I
Yeah,
think that's very important for each individual, because no individual's career path is going to be the same. Mine's going to be completely different than anyone in the audience here today.
yeah, yeah. So I've done a little bit of coding in the past, but I gotta admit, I have 2 business degrees, and that's not good for this audience. But one of the things that is absolutely ridiculous to me is the amount of reflection, the amount of goal setting, the amount of like what you're just talking about here, Sean, like going down, writing down your past, thinking about your future. Every business person gets this as baseline education. And the ridiculous part of me is not that they get it, it's that other professions don't get this, because that whole process that you
Mm-hmm.
went through, that's self-reflection. And for, engineers that generally on the whole are learning animals, and they're learning new things externally, like front end, back end application, different things about the craft. Learning about yourself and reflecting on yourself can be some of the most valuable and irreplaceable. Like you can't replace that time. It helps you kind of like looking internally at what your path is. It's such an important skill set. So I'm glad that you're
Mm-hmm.
really kind of making that clear directive to folks. Is like, for me, it was like grab a pen and paper and go to the back of a coffee shop and just talk about the things I really loved in my careers, the things I really hated in my careers, the things that gave me energy, the things that took away my energy. And like, you know what? Just circle the things that you really, really loved and tell a story from those highlights, because hopefully those things add up to the next position that you're looking for.
Right on. Yeah. Just again, where you've headed and where you've been and where you're headed. That is definitely something you want to look for in your new opportunities.
Cool. I will quickly, I mean, that's kind of talking about maximizing the impact of your experiences.
Mm.
So there's an interview you did where you talked about having hesitation around, should I talk about my leak code study guide project with Twitter? How was it meta to talk about building an interview prep website
Yeah.
during the
Yeah.
interview?
For individuals who haven't heard that podcast, I spoke with another individual about interviewing at Twitter, and I think one of the questions I was asked is something along the lines of like, talk about your accomplishments or something you're proud of, something along those lines. And I brought up my LeetCode pattern website. If you haven't seen it, it's an interview prep website, and it was kind of meta to bring it up during the actual interview. I was hesitant at first, but a friend of mine said like, hey, look, what's there to lose? And so I did. I brought it up, and the interviewers were like, they were amazed. I remember they were really, really happy. They're asking questions about like, how did I go about doing it? What was my cause for doing it? New features. Like we talked about it for a good 15 minutes, and it was a really, really big plus, I think, on my panel, because it's not something that you see from a lot of people. And I think it showcased, growth and giving back to the community and a bunch of other traits that are seen as positives.
Yeah, and I actually kind of want to use this because I talked so long. I wanted to kind of like use this to kind of talk into like bridge this to like the future, right? Like we were talking a little bit before this about like, hey, like where do you see these sort of technical interviews, growing? And then overall, like how does that impact of your personal projects or the open source projects you do? Like how would you kind of, going forward, how would you weight that? Oh, when I'm looking for a new job, should it be every time I kind of do this leak code prep and go and do this? Or is it a better strategy to really find an avenue, maybe in the open source community where you can contribute more consistently and have, instead of a proxy of your ability to solve problems, a public record of that. So that's a lot of things, but I'm interested in A, what's the future of technical interviews? Where do you see this stuff going? And B, how important is personal branding and the experiences you have outside of work going to play into that?
Yeah, open source contributions hits on brand for sure. Working in the public, you can know your accomplishments are shown in the public, but also your failures. And I think I don't take the word failures as in like a concrete, like 100% like negative. I think it shows opportunity for growth, especially if you learn from them. And so tying that in with the brand, it showcases am I an individual who is willing to grow outside of work, grow, give back to the community. Am I an individual who's learning new things? Like I'm an SRE, I work with like a lot of backend stuff, but my Leeko website is 100% React, and I'm literally self-taught for everything on that. So it was a way of showing like, hey, like I'm willing to learn new things, actually able to learn new things. And, what's better than being able to link someone during an interview, a hyperlink to a project, a GitHub repo or something of that sort.
By the way, I'm just going to grab that lead code patterns link here for the people in the chat and post it there and get back there. This is awesome. I'm going to ask in the few minutes left here, we're going to get to Omar's question from kind of algorithms. And his question is, when it comes to algorithm questions versus more system designy questions, what do you think gives you a better or more realistic picture of a candidate's skills or knowledge? Does that just change as you interview for seniority or for the type of role, with system design being more important for senior folks?
Yeah, awesome question, Omar. System design is known to be asked for more senior folks. I was asked it even as like a junior at Twitter, but there's different emphasis on how deep do you go for the system design. Are you able to talk about like a separate like an API layer to like a database layer, to have load balancers, to have caching? That was something that I here at Twitter and even at other companies, interviewers probed how deep I went into it. Like, was I aware of like things like cap theorem and sharding and the pros and cons of sharding and prevent hot shards and stuff like that? I think that comes to a lot of studying early in your career, because I wasn't taught that in school. I teach myself all of that stuff. I think be prepared for it. But yeah.
Very cool. And there's this one follow-up there. I think the idea is, have you ever interviewed somebody that was solid technically but didn't have the soft skills, and did they redeem themselves? Or even the inverse, somebody that maybe didn't have the technical skills but had such strong essential skills that they still were a good fit?
Yeah, I've seen this, and I've had friends who lean more on the social side rather than technical side. And personally, for myself, if I was a manager, I would lean towards the person who's shown the most like enthusiasm to grow, ability to grow, and has like a somewhat strong baseline for technical skills. If they're not able to code, just basic stuff, that does raise some questions. But if they're self-taught and they're a joy to work with, I don't see why not. Because at the end of the day, communication is extremely, extremely important when you're working in a team, especially the team I work on.
Cool. What should people do to get to follow and learn from you more here, Sean? I really appreciated all your information here. This is something that you're absolutely passionate about, including the open source side of things. So what should people follow you on Twitter and check out the GitHub for leak code patterns?
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter at Sean Prashad, all one word. I have a personal website. I think my email is on there. Anyone in the audience today or future individuals watching it, reach out. I'm more than happy to give advice or share resources that I've used. And yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge here. This is such an important thing. Again, like, interviews are not natural ways for a lot of people to communicate with others. But I think that it's like all the things you do to prep for an interview are things that you can grow your skill set, but also grow your understanding yourself and your self-awareness there. And so if you kind of make it an interview with yourself, I guess, before you're interviewing with others, that it can maybe make it an easier thing. But folks like you that are open sourcing the knowledge, sharing, being willing to spend time with folks like us to share that knowledge are absolutely essential to growing this kind of ecosystem and advancing it. So thank you so much, Sean.
No worries. I'm super happy to be here.
Awesome. Okay. Take care. Thank you, everyone that attended today, and everyone's going to be watching this later on YouTube.